And then, of course, the lack of resources to address substance abuse. What we've experienced here in Worth ISD with our alternative campuses is a large population of our students that are coming to our DAEP campuses are coming for drug-related offenses. And so, we had to really reflect and think about what are we providing these students, to kind of break the cycle of substance abuse and also just possession at times. And so, that's what we wanted to address is, looking at the services we're able to provide them for substance abuse. We wanted to be intentional about keeping students on track to graduate and provide positive life outcomes. It was also our intent to address the racial achievement gaps, as we know our students of color are disproportionately impacted by disciplinary decisions. And that's just not something that's happening in Worth ISD. That's something that's happening across the nation. And so we certainly aren't immune to it. The basis of our redesign needed to include social emotional learning, restorative practices. We needed to increase resources. Project-based learning needed to have an emphasis on creativity because we know that's what really drives students when they're able to have an outlet of self-expression. We needed to overhaul the entry and the exit of students. It became very, very, dry and not a lot of interaction with the student. It was just very procedural, so to speak. And so we weren't really getting a feel for the student on the entry, and then we weren't able to assess, how they were performing when they left. Did we feel that they're going to repeat the behaviors that returned? And we also wanted to have some follow-up and through once the students exit the campus. Once they left, we didn't want to just think that everything's fine and the student is going to perform well now that they've served their time with us. And so we wanted to make sure that services were going to be continuous once they left. And then, of course, curriculum alignment. Because of the setup of our DAEP programs across the state, you're not able to provide the full array of classes that they may have participated in at the home campus. And so we needed to make sure that our curriculum had provided a continuation of those classes. We needed a partner that was familiar with the work we wanted to embark on and had a history of being innovative, transformative, and restorative. As discussed earlier in 2018, we launched a quality seats analysis to identify strengths and weaknesses of our district. Again, the quality seats analysis reflected a low graduation rate at our DAEPs. And in 2019, Worth ISD announced a call for great schools to seek a partner. And upon the completion of that call, we selected Big Thought. And I will turn it over to Mr. McPherson.
Thank you, Ben, and good morning, everyone. Greg McPherson with Big Thought. It's my pleasure to be here with everyone this morning. Big Thought is a 30-plus year community-based nonprofit. We're located in Dallas and serve the North Texas region. And we are focused on empowering youth and closing the opportunity gap. Our North Star, that long-term vision that drives us, is that all youth in marginalized communities are equipped to imagine and create their best lives and world. We believe deeply that all youth have greatness in them inherently, and that it's not our job as adults to create or provide that greatness, but instead create the conditions by which youth can, pursue, develop, grow the greatness that they already have, and pursue that future and that fullest potential. When we talk about empowering youth, really we organizationally focus in on three sort of tenets of that. For us, that means working with youth to build their creative muscle. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we mean about the creative muscle here in just a moment, because we think about it very broadly. Also to think about and help youth develop their social and emotional skills and well-being, knowing that this is a critical skill set for youth as they navigate not just the present, but as they prepare to navigate what can be an ambiguous future. And last, to to help work with youth to discover and shape their authentic voice, and so that they are bringing that voice and experience, those assets, to the table in their learning and education. So as Ben noted, in 2019, Fort Worth ISD released their call for great schools, and Big Thought raised its hand and responded and was ultimately selected. However, we like to think that we began responding to the call earlier than that. Approximately 3 years ago, we adopted a new 10-year strategic plan for our organization. And in the process of developing that strategic plan, we were visiting with youth participants in our programs and alumni. And one specific alumni of a program that we have done for 25 plus years with Dallas County Juvenile Department said to us, "Why did I have to go to jail to get something that changed my life?" And that sat with us. And we thought about it, and we did not have a good answer. And so that comment and the discussion we had organizationally coming out of that comment really helped shape some of our strategic plan, and specifically the idea of us starting to look at ways in which we could expand the work that we have historically done in an adjudicated setting, those methodologies and practices. How could we expand those to non-adjudicated settings? And so in that way, when Fort Worth ISD released their call, our decision to respond to that was because it connected with the charge that we had from our youth and through our strategic plan to look at other environments besides the juvenile system where we can deploy this work and have an impact. Likewise, along with that, as Ben outlined, there was a clear philosophical alignment between our two organizations on what we believe about youth and what we wanted to accomplish. And so the idea that we could enter into this collaboration with an asset-based lens on youth, and that we could really innovate and reimagine the alternative education setting, which is so often been perceived as punitive, and think about it instead as a transformative time and experience. That was something that we saw alignment with, and we were very excited at the opportunity to pursue. Lastly, for us, we also saw this as an opportunity to not only think about how these methodologies could translate into an alternative education setting, but could allow us to start thinking about the long term and how this work could potentially inform new thinking and practice in education more broadly, beyond alternative education. And so for those reasons, we responded to the call and were excited to be selected. To share just a little bit more about the programmatic model that sort of informs Big Thought's work, and that is a foundation for this new school model and redesign. It's based upon again a 25-year program called Creative Solutions that we have done in collaboration with Dallas County Juvenile Department. It's an arts as workforce intervention that has underpinnings of trauma to healing methodologies and practices in place. What that means in practical terms is it's a 7-week summer intensive program, and we're working with approximately 40 youth on probation during that time period. The work that they are doing and that we are embedding that workforce skill development within is the creation of a theatrical performance piece or or a visual art gallery installation. And so through those artistic and creative avenues, we're working on their workforce skills. And we're working to promote that social and emotional well-being. This has been an incredibly successful and impactful program for us organizationally throughout the years. As you can see here, our 7-year average recidivism rate for this program is sitting just at about 10%. In 2019, it was actually at 4%. For that year. And this is in comparison to other probationary programs in the state that have recidivism rates that average more closely to the about 38% approximately. So creative solutions is really a foundational piece of this program model that Big Thought was bringing to the table. In addition to that, we have a framework that we call the creator archetype that all of our work, including creative solutions, really connects and aligns to. And so when we talk about, what is creativity, and we define creativity broadly, this is really that definition. We view creativity as those skills, competencies, the experiences that are going to equip youth to create their best lives and world. And for us, that connects to 5 key domains: programming and experiences that are related to social and emotional foundations, academics and artistry, digital fluency, design thinking, and civics and service. And so all of this is also informing the work that we are designing for this new school model. So once we were selected, it was time to roll up our sleeves and get mobilized, get to work. And this is a new experience for us organizationally. And so what that meant for us was this was not just about a program team or group getting to work on this. We recognized that we needed to activate the entire organization in support of this effort, that this was a cross-functional activity. And so we got everybody together and we began that work. And that meant bringing in not just our programs team, but our design team, our communications team, human resources, legal, etc. This is the first time that we are collaborating with Fort Worth ISD. And so it was really important to begin establishing those meetings and the cadences, but really ultimately what we were doing is not just designing a new school model together, we were building relationships and trust in real time while we did that. And so it's been important to create space within this process for that as well. And last, we knew that we couldn't do this alone and that there was additional support needed. And so we had the opportunity to bring on some strategic capacity and thought partnership support throughout this project. And so that has included a project manager who could really dedicate themselves to this work and help us connect the dots between the various partners and keep us on track as we move forward. We were able to engage Empower Schools to support some of the operational and logistical considerations and specifically really help the district and us think about that performance contract that would help govern the partnership. And then last and certainly not least was the ability to engage Transcend Education, to come in and be a thought partner with us and really specifically help us with the community-driven design component of this. And so with that, I'd love to hand things over to Nikhil to talk a little bit more about Transcend and the design process itself.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for coming. I am Nikhil Kalra. I am a partner at Transcend Education, working specifically with schools, districts, and school-adjacent nonprofits to think about community-driven design or redesign of schools. So if you haven't heard of Transcend, really our goal is to come alongside schools, districts, and nonprofits to help rethink the way that schools operate so that all young people can learn in ways that enable them to thrive and transform. And really, our goal is threefold. It's to, spark new innovations, to come alongside schools and districts to advance those innovations, and then finally to spread extraordinary and equitable learning environments that are the outcome. We are grounded in a couple key beliefs. The first and most important is that we believe that all children have infinite potential. And I think that's especially true when thinking about an alternative space. But in order to help students achieve this potential, ultimately we have to reimagine schooling, and that the best way to do that is through a community-driven process. And so that's really what we engaged both Big Thought and Fort Worth ISD in as we started to explore what a reimagined alternative space could look like. So we do this in 4 steps. The first was to learn both from our community and from our school, from students and families, what's working, what's not, what are our hopes and what are our dreams, what do we wish this school really felt like. Then to actually do some envisioning of that school model, to build and test parts of the model, try it, and then learn from it, and then continue on this continuous loop of R&D and innovation that ultimately we think will lead to a stronger and stronger school each and every day. For us, that started by first assembling a diverse design team. Obviously, 2 key players are Big Thought and Fort Worth, but we also wanted members of the community and specifically students. So we were able to get a student on the design team. We got some community members on the design team. We invited a few more students and families. They weren't ultimately able to join us, but that is central to the work, is giving voices to each of our stakeholders. And so in so much as we weren't able to talk to have students and families on the design team, we spent a good deal of time reaching out to students, families, teachers, school leaders, to talk to them about their experience in DAEP and understand their perspectives so that we were holding those true in our design. Ultimately, this design team was responsible for 3 inputs, which was to build stronger conditions for innovation on campus, to go learn from our community and from other models, and then finally to create a coherent and equitable and innovative design for the alternative school. Ultimately, our goal, the output, which will launch this fall, is what we hope will be an extraordinary and equitable both experiences and outcomes for our students. So you might say, like, all right, how did we learn? We learned in 3 key ways. One I've started to mention, which is we actually went out and interviewed a variety of stakeholders. We talked to students that had been either in an alternative program or in Big Thought's case, like had been in the juvenile justice system in the past, to learn from their experience. We talked to teachers and school leaders, both that worked at the DAEP school and that had interfaced with the DAEP school, to get their perspective. And then we also talked to key community members. All of that, of course, those are the central people we talked to. We also, on the back end, we're talking to leaders at Fort Worth ISD to understand the strengths of the district, their social emotional learning team, their restorative practices team, their equity team, their academic team, because of course the school is not going to exist in a vacuum. So we want to understand what's happening at the district and where we can innovate and redesign. We also thought about, where society's heading. We did some deep research and had deep conversations about what is it that we're ultimately trying to prepare students for that will allow them to be successful on campus, back at their home school, and beyond high school graduation. And then finally, we thought about what others in the space were doing, either at alternative schools or particularly innovative traditional school models, and try to identify, like, what do we love about practices that are currently happening. One key place we looked was within Big Thought's current programming of creative solutions. Ultimately, we learned 5 things. 3 of them are on this screen. The first is that the structure of schools isn't always built for the wholeness of youth. So teachers often have to go above and beyond. And we needed to rethink that system. We needed to rethink a school that intentionally supported the whole child. The second is that we needed to think deeply about how we make students comfortable with who they are, committed to themselves and to improving themselves, and to reflect positively on their own abilities and their ability to improve. In essence, we wanted to build confidence. The third thing that was most important that we heard was that relationships are central to the work. of course, this is obvious in education, but it came out so clearly in our interviews that it felt like we needed to name this, that it was important to both build deep and meaningful relationships as students entered, maintain them throughout their time at a DAEP campus, and keep them going well beyond a student's visit. The fourth is that we kept hearing this like broken or some version of, troubled, challenged, and we needed to make a shift to be more asset-minded. We weren't there to gift them power ourselves. We were there to like help them reveal their inherent power, their inherent goodness, their inherent drive. And so finally, we wanted to help set students up for success when they return for their homeschool. In order to do this, we landed on a couple of key questions. The first was like, okay, so now that we've heard these key insights, what must be true about the school that we design? The second is, what are we striving for? What do we hope students achieve here while they're in our learning environment? And then third, what are the learning outcomes that we're driving towards with our students? And what student experiences must we design to achieve those outcomes? We ultimately landed on this school design, which we'll share together. The first and most important thing is we sat down and really thought about the mission of an alternative space. And ultimately, we said that the school community needs to elevate the greatness of students through co-designing spaces with them, building their confidence, helping them focus their ambition, and applying their unique talent, both in school and beyond it. So there's a couple of key phrases here, like this is a space where we want to build confidence, we want to focus ambition, and we want to help apply their unique talent. Inherent in this is the idea that all students have unique talent and can be ambitious and can be confident, and it's our job to help those blossom while students are in an alternative space. We ultimately decided that there were 4 key things we wanted to be true everywhere on campus in order to achieve that mission. 1, we wanted to ground our school in connection and community. We said that those relationships were so important. That needed to be true everywhere. From the moment a student arrived for their first meeting, to every class, to every lunch period, to dismissal, to the time that they returned to their home campus. The second was that we needed to have a whole child focus. We couldn't simply replicate the homeschool in an alternative space with online classes. We had to think creatively and say, how do we make sure we meet the needs of the whole child while they're there? Academic, certainly, but also social-emotional, relationships. How do we meet all their needs? The third is, ultimately, if students are going to be successful on our campus and beyond, we have to promote the idea that they have agency and give them opportunities to be self-directed. And then finally, we wanted the learning to be relevant. Especially, we heard from some students that school was not a place where they had found success, that they may need to be re-engaged in a variety of ways. And the idea of making school relevant was one way for us to re-engage and say, hey, there's a purpose for this, and school can be fun, and you can learn a ton. Ultimately, that had us land on 4 key graduate aims.
Yes, and these graduate aims really speak to the sort of the outcomes that we envision for youth in the time that they spend with us in this campus setting, and where we want to move the needle. And so these 4 key graduate aims: 2, focus on students reflecting on themselves, and 2, focus on their relationship and work with others. So first and foremost, we wanted to help students better get to know themselves, their strengths, their areas for growth, their passions, how they manage challenging situations, and how they could unlock the best versions of themselves. We also wanted to support students to refocus on their future, specifically what they want to accomplish, to have a clear plan for how to accomplish that, and to begin to build some of those critical skills in order to do so. At the same time, we want students to engage productively with their teachers and peers. We want to provide students opportunities to build relationship skills through interactions with people who have a diverse life experience and worldview, including those that have backgrounds that are different than their own. And finally, we want to support students to understand how they bring value to a team, to enhance their written and verbal communication skills, build confidence in sharing their ideas, and interacting productively in an academic setting. And so that shows up in sort of 4 key experiences that we've designed into this school model. Nikhil, do you want to speak a little bit further about these 4?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 4 key student experiences, the first, as Ben mentioned earlier, was to really focus in on how students transition in and out of the alternative space. We realized almost immediately that relationships are formed in that moment, perceptions are formed in that moment, or they're not formed in that moment, or perceptions aren't formed positively in that moment. And it was important for us to be really thoughtful about when students needed to transition to an alternative campus and how they did so. Similarly, there's great work being done on the alternative campus, and then going back to school, to the home school, if none of it continues, it can feel jarring. Students have to re-enter their traditional campus without maybe the same level of supports. And so we needed to think deeply about what that transition back to campus could look like. And so we developed a comprehensive model that starts from the very first time a student is introduced to the idea of an alternative campus, and that lasts well beyond their stay, that is grounded in how do we get to know students and their families deeply, how do we understand their needs, their strengths, and come alongside them on this journey to help them grow. The second key experience is how we thought about social emotional support and restorative practices. One key shift you heard was that we wanted to move this from a punitive space to a restorative space. And so we thought deeply about what would we need to do to make that true. Things as small as like how are we, or as small or big as how are we building culture? How are we starting the day each morning? How are we checking up on students throughout the day? And how are students leaving campus? How are they getting individual or small group attention to work on social emotional skills? Were all key factors. And then when there is, how are we establishing sort of a respect relation agreement, and how are we addressing when there are breaches to that agreement? The third piece were personalized academic supports. We heard really clearly that there are students coming from a variety of different schools with a variety of different needs, and trying to produce one curriculum that met all of their needs was going to be really challenging. And so we created an academic model that focused in on the 4 key subjects: math, reading, science, and social studies. And that ultimately blended grade level instruction, which we know students are going to continue to need, and personalized learning, so that students could be addressing their own gaps if they have any, or advancing their own academic pursuits. And then finally, the 4th key piece was project-based learning. As we mentioned, relevance was a key aspect of our school design model. And so students are going to spend upwards of 2 hours a day on project-based learning, specifically around design thinking, working in, individually and in small groups on projects that are directly tied to what's happening in the world around them. And our hope is that this also helps bolster some of those graduate aims of both helping students reflect internally about themselves, but also work collaboratively with their peers. So what's next? I'm going to turn it over to Ben.
All right. So after 3 years in the making, we're excited to embark on this work as we are opening our campus in August. And through our partnership agreement, which in essence is our MOU, and the autonomies it provides, we can now collaborate as both monitor and authorizer and partner operator. The program will be guided by 3 levers, 3 SGS levers. Lever 1, analyzing school performance, graduation rates, recidivism, and other data points and ongoing basis on the annual portfolio process. And then lever 2, expanding grade options. We want to take this innovative school action as an opportunity to build out systems and structures that will bring our key student experiences to life. As we mentioned, restorative practices, project-based learning, And lever 4, lasting structures, policies, and procedures. As a collaborative operator, we want to make sure that we're partnering in the hiring process, as we've partnered with making sure that they have input. They, being Big Thought, has the say in the hiring of the school leader. And we want to make sure that that's a practice that's continuous. So make sure that they feel that their voice is being heard, and that we are selecting a partner that is going to carry out this process and facilitate it to its entirety. And then, of course, monitoring innovative DAEP model implementation and continuous improvement, autonomy and unique professional development plans for this partnership, and ongoing community engagement and representation through the Innovative Advisory Council. And this is making sure that our community has a voice. So at this time, we will open it up for questions.
I have a question, Benjamin, if that's okay.
Sure.
So first of all, my name's showing up as Angelica Ramsey. I'm actually Darrington Ramsey. I'm the executive director at Ector County Independent School District. So thank you all for sharing. One of the questions I wanted to ask is can you share an example of maybe a policy that you all have either been thinking about, initiated, or implemented that you feel is going to help sustain this work beyond sort of this initial implementation? So how does this work continue forward if sort of personnel moves around? We know in education there's promotions, there's attrition, there's folks that are moving in and out. So I'm just wondering, are there policies that are put in place to sustain this work at a particular level? Outside of the MOU, I don't know if that there's an actual policy that states that we get to, have a certain autonomy, so to speak, for the the continuation of the program. However, based on the MOU, because it's more than 1 year, there is systems in place to make sure, like I said earlier, that Big Thought has a voice in the hiring of the leader, and of course that leader will collaborate with both the executive director over the campus and of course the program operator from Big Thought that's represented on the campus as well. There is an understanding with our chiefs and with our board that this work needs to have the structures in place to make sure that we're not just placing individuals on the campus, as sometimes occurs in larger districts, and that these individuals are actually hired and are recruited specifically for their level of expertise.
Mr. Leos, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
We can, David.
Oh, good. And if I may, David Steins, Chief Innovation Officer in Fort Worth. I think that's a great question because one of the challenges we experienced is in this space, there is certain perceptions and certain thoughts about what it means to become a principal of a DAEP. And honestly, one thing we're trying to change with this effort is to really change that discussion of who should teach and who should lead in these spaces. And for us, an internal, not necessarily an internal policy, but a practice would be to change that paradigm with this work. And to say that, to show that this is a viable place to go and lead and make the biggest difference for kids, and building pipelines specifically for that. Through our leadership pipelines, we're building from assistant principals to teachers and even to principals, because even this position that we've hired for this is a bit of a hybrid. And we took away, like some districts have a CTE director, for example, and that CTE director manages the CTE center for the district. And that's the kind of approach we're taking for this campus, to show that this is a viable pathway for leaders. This is a pathway for leaders that want to do this work. And it's not just a place where you go because you want to be a principal, you want to be a school leader, and then you want to move on. This is a specific space for a specific individual that is looking to work here. And we're hoping that our pipeline work with our leaders will help us sustain the leadership needed.
Thanks for sharing that, Mr. Steins. That did bring up one other question that I have. Did you all find in your sort of needs assessment or quality seats assessment that there were sort of numbers or data that represented a disproportionality of particular student groups being represented within that program? And if so, I guess my question is, how did you all address that? And was it sort of centered around culturally responsive pedagogy as one sort of example, or cultural awareness. Did you all engage in any of those things? And if so, would you share some examples of that?
Yes, we did. We have been engaging in some of that work. I think most of the data from most of the districts, especially ours too, is we do see an over-identification of African-American boys, students of color, and within our data, not only for DAEP, but also for our OCI ISS, which is work that's also ongoing within the district. This change in the DAEP is just another step in that work. For the past several years, we've been engaging in changing that reality of that over-identification through the use of restorative circles. We've adopted a district equity policy. If you watch the news from Fort Worth ISD, you can tell that there's a lot of angst on both sides, a lot of opinions on both sides about this work. What we know as a district is that this work needs to be done for our students. We need to address how our students are receiving support. And I think it goes to that asset mindset that was in the presentation. Students aren't broken. We here in the district see that our students are assets to be invested in. They're not problems to be solved. And so with the restorative circles, we're looking at strategies like building reset rooms. We heard a district recently talk about reset rooms where we don't always have to suspend students and send them off campus. That there's a way to work with kids in a very positive and affirming space that we can send them back to the classroom setting without putting them in ISS and OCI. But for us, it's an ongoing discussion. It's one that's going to have to continue. Slow down a little bit with the pandemic. Obviously, if you're like us, all of our numbers for suspensions and all that dropped because we had half of our students virtual. But we continue the conversation and the work of this DAEP to then add value to overall how our students are being addressed when it comes to alternative discipline settings, which even that we're trying to get away from calling it that.
Thanks, David. I really appreciate those responses. And I'd love to be able to, maybe if you could put your contact information in the chat. I'm starting a new position, so I'd love to be able to have additional conversations with you. And thank you for the courageous work your team is doing.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you all for taking some time this morning to listen to us and to listen to the work that we're embarking on. And we wish you well. We hope you have a fantastic summer. I know that some of you haven't started your summer yet, but you should be getting some time off shortly. And thank you all, and have a fantastic day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.